to 5 years ago when we started doing everything on Zoom. So hopefully this doesn't bring back any anxiety or anything. But it's like Steven said, it's nice that despite the snow, we can still get
To
together. So
five.
yeah, okay. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I heard some background noise there, but I think we're all good. Um, yeah, like Steven said, if anyone wants to turn on the cameras, feel free to do that. It's always nicer to talk to people than just an empty screen. So for those who have their cameras on, I really appreciate it. So yeah, I a few months ago, probably, I gave a class on my first class in this series on Deuteronomy, and I've always really found Deuteronomy an interesting book. And when you think of Deuteronomy, there's always I knew verses in Deuteronomy, so like for instance, Jesus quotes Deuteronomy where he says, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. Uh, Deuteronomy has the Ten Commandments. Deuteronomy 28, with the blessings and the cursings, that's kind of a famous chapter. But what is Deuteronomy itself about? Like, what's the purpose of the book of Deuteronomy? Because the people were going to enter the promised land, and then they decided not to, but they would have done that without Deuteronomy. So what's the purpose behind Deuteronomy? Is it just a bunch of laws? Is that all it is? And sometimes we can relate to particular books, right? So Nehemiah, you can relate to a book like Nehemiah because they're rebuilding the wall, they're working together side by side, people that were very different, and that's obviously very easily related to our life in an ecclesia. We're working side by side, working towards the same purpose. And Abraham was called out of Ur, and so you can kind of see, okay, there's an easy practical lesson for me on how to live, but a bunch of these laws don't really apply to me anymore. Like I can't do these things. And there's a whole bunch of weird names in this chapter that Stephen read for us. Thank you. Like, what does this mean? What is the purpose? And I've often looked at the book of Deuteronomy and the way that we can relate to it in the sense that they're about to enter the promised land and we're about to enter into the promised land. And that's kind of how we connect with the book of Deuteronomy, right? That we're both just at the doorstep waiting to enter into the promised land, like Stephen mentioned this morning a few times in Z was presiding. And that's not true, right? That is, we are both in that situation. But actually, what I've learned is that how we can relate to the book of Deuteronomy, and this is what we looked at in the first class, is that they Deuteronomy was given by God to prepare them for baptism, right? As they entered through the Jordan, to live in a land faithful to God, surrounded by a whole bunch of people who are not faithful to God, but with a purpose that it might be well with them, right? So whenever, and these are all things that we looked at in the first class, um, it was all about, when you go into the land, when you go into the land, when you go into the land, right? So that's why he gave it to them to prepare them for when they go into the land. And then very often it said that it might go well with you, that it might go well with you, that it might go well with you. Right? And so what God wanted was for it to go well with them, right? That's why Deuteronomy was given. It wasn't just another set of laws. It was something that they needed as people, that they might be baptized, live a life faithful to God, surrounded by people who are not faithful to God, that it might go well with them, right? So that's kind of that was the purpose of the book of Deuteronomy that we looked at in the first class. So then I left. I ended that class with a question. Well, who wrote Deuteronomy? So we know what the purpose is of Deuteronomy. We know who it's written to. It was written to that generation that was in the wilderness for 38 years. And then everyone had died that had left Egypt, right? Who was an adult at that time. They had all passed away. So it was specifically given to that next generation. But who was it from? And the easy answer is, well, it was from God, and he gave it through Moses. But there's more to than that. And actually understanding who gave the book of Deuteronomy essentially actually really changes, at least for me, it does, it changes the understanding of what the purpose is of the book of Deuteronomy. Okay. So that's something that we're going to look at in the second class, and then on Wednesday I'm on again coincidentally, and then I'll be giving the third class in this series. So we're going to start off in Deuteronomy chapter 8, if you'd like a turn there. So Deuteronomy chapter 8, and I'll just read the two first verses there. So all the commandments that I'm commanding you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to give to your forefathers. You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments or not, right? And so there's a generation who wouldn't obey God. They wouldn't go into the promised land, right? They saw these giants and they said, no way. They're mightier than we are. These walls are huge. We're like grasshoppers in their sight. We're not going to go in. And then what God did with them those 40 years is that he tested them, right? He humbled them to know what was in their heart. And so one example of that testing came out in Exodus chapter 16. And this is where he gave them the manna. Now there's a few things that are really interesting here. Because in verse 3, it says there, the sons of Israel said to them, would that we had died, this is Exodus 16, verse 3, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger, right? So they're complaining to God that, or to Moses, I guess, but to God indirectly as well. Why did you bring us out here? We're just gonna, you just brought us out here for us to die. It'd be so much better if we were back in Egypt. And so then verse 4 is really interesting because he says, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from you from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction, right? And uh, everyone that I can see here is a parent. So, well, sorry, almost. Um, you know, it's a very common scenario where your kids are, whining, having a meltdown at a grocery store. I want this, I want this, I want this. And sometimes you just, give in to whatever they're asking for. But that's not what God is doing here, right? So they're complaining, we're hungry, and God gives them food, but not, it's not that parent that just gives into their child's complaining. God gave them that food in order that he might test them, right? So all of these things happened. God was, um, yeah, do these things very intentionally with them, right? Um, so it wasn't always easy that testing. They had a bit of hardship, they had a bit of pain, but it was ultimately for their own good, right? That they may grow from that. Now, if we go back to Deuteronomy chapter 8 again, and we will pick it up in verse 4, where we see that God really did care for them, right? So yes, he tested them, and things were sometimes hard. But look at what happened here as well in verse 4 of Deuteronomy chapter 8. Your clothing did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years, right? So he really did look after them, right? The fact that their feet didn't even swell, like that's miraculous, right? Their shoes never wore out, none of their clothing. So God really did look after them, right? And so he provided for all of those needs. So why did they have all of those experiences? What was the point of all that? Well, we'll see that in verse 5. Thus you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you just as a man disciplines his son. And that's really important to understand, that all that was happening is because he was their father, right? He looked after them like they were his children. And when you look at it in that way, it, you know, the way we treat our children is, we're loving, we strive to be loving parents, doing all these things for their best interests, right? We don't just give them rules and say, here's a bunch of rules, obey them because I tell you to. We give them rules and we give them instruction because it's for their best interest, right? And sometimes that means we'll test them. We'll allow them to do some small things. You know, as an example, we wanted to see how our family, the kids really wanted a dog. And I was pretty certain that as much as they promised they were going to look after the dog and they're going to take it for walks and they're going to do all these things, I'm pretty sure it was going to come down on me. And so I said, okay, let's start with a guinea pig. Okay. I'll get a guinea pig too, and we'll see how that goes. And that experience proved to me that they were not ready for any larger pets that they actually have to, look after and that were going to be with us for years to come. So it was a good test. They failed, and now we have no pets. Um, but God is doing the same, right? Um, but he was that loving father that had something in store for them, right? There was an outcome. There was something that God was working towards with them, which you can see in the next verses. We'll start in chapter 8 and verse 6. Therefore, you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God to walk in his ways to fear him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without scarcity, in which you will not lack anything, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And when you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God in the good for the good land which he has given to you. Right. So he wants them to be happy. He wants them to be satisfied. He wants them to be content. He wants them to be joyful, to not lack anything. And we want the exact same thing for our children, but that means that we need to correct them, we need to guide them, we need to understand that, giving in to all of your desires, just getting whatever you want isn't going to make you happy, right? That's not going to satisfy you. It is actually it's going to do the exact opposite, right? And he wants to give that to them as his children, and he would have given that to the previous generation, right? Because that's what he promised to Abram, to Isaac, and to Israel. He promised to them that they would get that, and instead Uh, they refused to inherit that. They refused to walk in and take what God had promised them. So we can just read this in Deuteronomy chapter 1. We can just remind ourselves of what happened there. Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 25. It says, they took some of the fruit of the land in their hands and they brought it down to us, and they brought us back a report and said, it is a good land which the Lord our God is about to give to us, right? That was the land that was just described in Deuteronomy 8. It was an amazing land. Yet you're not willing to go up, but rebelled against the commandments of the Lord your God, and you grumbled in your tents and said, because the Lord hates us, he's brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us. I don't know about any of your kids, or maybe you've seen this in your younger siblings, but you know, I think just about every teenager has definitely said, hate you to their parents. And that's exactly what's happening here, right? Verse 28, where can we go up? Our brethren have made our hearts melt, saying the people are bigger and taller than we, and the cities are larger and fortified to heaven. And besides, we saw the sons of the Anakim there. And they said to you, do not be, then I said to you, do not be shocked, nor fear them. The Lord our God who goes before you himself will fight on your behalf, just as he did for you in Egypt, before your eyes, right? They saw these things. It literally happened right in front of their eyes. And he's going to do it again in the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried you just as a man carries his son, right? And so we see this phrase being repeated here, and it's very intentionally that God uses that phrasing that God says, I'm doing these things just like a parent does to their child. Right? I carried you just like a father carries his son in all the way which you have walked until you came into this place. And so God will do the work. He's going to bring them there. He's going to give that to them like he did before, right? And so we see him care for his children. We saw him care uh yeah, for the people as well, like a man cares for his son. The challenge was though, and again, this is not uncommon in parenting, is that they just didn't trust him. Because in verse 32 it says, for all this, you did not trust the Lord your God, who goes before you on your way to seek out a place for you to encamp in fire by night and cloud by day to show you the way in which you should go. So they just didn't trust that God would do what he said he would do and what he had done before. Now, chapter 2 that we read through, which I know was a longer chapter. A lot of interesting names are in there. But this chapter is, if we see who is all involved here and what God does, it is really, really eye-opening. So we're just going to go through this chapter and maybe just a little bit of slower pace and point out a few things. So chapter 2 and verse 1. And then we turn and set out. So this is he's recounting their wandering essentially in the wilderness. Okay. So then we turned and set out for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea. And the Lord spoke to me and circled Mount Seir for many days. And the Lord spoke to me, saying, you have circled this mountain long enough. Now turn north and command the people, saying, you will pass through the territories of your brothers, the sons of Esau, who live in Seir, and they'll be afraid of you. So be very careful, do not provoke them, for I will not give you any of their land, even as little as a footstep. Why? Because I've given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. Right? So the only reason they couldn't meddle with them, they were not going to take anything from there, not their land, and not their stuff. Why? Because God had given this to the sons of Esau, not even a foot's breadth. Esau. He says, I think it is in Hosea, that he hated Esau. Right? God loved Jacob, but he hated Esau. And yet, he will not allow them to take any of that simply because God had said, I will give this to you, and nothing was going to change that. And that is Esau. We'll keep going here in verse 6. You shall buy food from them with money so that they may eat, that you may eat. You shall also purchase water from them with money so that you may drink. For the Lord your God has blessed you in all that you've done. He has known you in your wanderings through this great wilderness. These 40 years, the Lord your God has been with you, and you have lacked nothing, right? So they lacked nothing, but also these other people of Esau, that land that God had promised to them, they also were given what God had promised to them. We'll continue then in verse 8. So we passed beyond our brothers, the sons of Esau, who lived in Seir, away from the Araba road, away from Elat and from Ezion Geber, and we turned and passed through by the way of the wilderness of Moab. Right? These are the next people they come in contact with. And Moab was, of course, one of the sons of Lot. Then verse 9, then the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab, nor provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land as a possession, because I've given Ar to the sons of Lot as a possession. So why can't they take that land? Again, because he promised it to the sons of Lot, right? So they couldn't just come in there and take that land strictly for the purpose that God had given it to the sons of Lot as a possession. Now, look who formerly lived there. This is where all the funky names come in. Verse 10, the Emim lived there formerly, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. Now, remember, it was the Anakim that kept the children of Israel from going into the promised land, right? Because they saw the Anakim there and they're afraid of them. but they live there. They formerly lived there. Verse 11, like the Anakim, they also regarded as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them the Emim. Um, and just verse 12 here, the Horites formerly lived in Seir, right? Again, the Horites formerly lived in Seir, right? Which is the land that was given to Esau. But the sons of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them and settled in their place, just as Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave to them. Right? And so God is giving this land to them, and he is driving out some of these giants from before them. It was God who did all that, and he would have done the exact same for the children of Israel, right? God said, I look after you, I go before you, I did all this, said God. Now look at the timing here. Actually, we'll just go down to verse 19, sorry. Um, when you come opposite the sons of Ammon, do not harass them, right? So this is Moab and Ammon. Those are the two sons of Lot. When you come opposite the sons of Ammon, do not harass them or provoke them, for I will not give you any of the lands of Ammon, the sons of Ammon, as a possession, because I've given it to the sons of Lot as a possession. It's also regarded as the land of the Rephaim, for Rephaim formerly lived in it, but the Ammonites call them Zamzumim. I don't know why they all have different names, but it's the way it is. A people as great and numerous and as tall as the Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them before them. Right? So this is all God's work. And they dispossessed them and settled in their land, in their place, just as he did for the sons of Esau. Right? So God did the same thing for the sons of Esau who live in Seir when he destroyed the Horites from before them. They dispossessed them and settled in their place even to this day. And it goes on, verse 23, the Avim, who lived in villages as far as Gaza, the Caphtorim, who came from Caphtor, destroyed them and lived in their place. Arise, set out, and pass through the valley of Arnon. Look, I have given Sihon the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and his land into your hand. Begin to take possession, contend with him in battle. This day I'll begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under heavens, who, when they hear the report of you, will tremble and be in anguish because of you. Right? So it was God who was removing all of these giants from before all these other nations. And he strictly did that because he had promised it to them, right? But how much more was he going to do that exact same thing for the children of Israel? Now, you can see the timing of this in verse 13. Now it says, arise and cross over the brook Zered for yourselves. And so we crossed the book of Zered. Now, Zered means pruning, right? And that's what he had done. God had essentially pruned out that entire generation who was unfaithful. Now, the time that it took for us to come from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed over the brook Zered was 38 years until all the generations of the men of war perished from within the camp, as the Lord had sworn to them. Moreover, the hand of the Lord was against them to destroy them from within the camp until they had all perished, right? And so we're now in that 40th year that that generation had passed, and God continues to work with the next generation. We can see that in uh, verse 26, if we'll pick it up there. And so I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kedemoth to Sihon, king of Heshbon, with words of peace, saying, let me pass through your land. I will travel only on the highway. I'll not turn aside to the right or to the left. And you will sell me food for money that I may eat, and give me water for money that I may drink. Only let me pass through on foot, just like the sons of Esau who live in Seir and the Moabites who live in Ar did for me, until I cross over Jordan into the land which the Lord our God is giving to us. But Sihon, the king of Heshbon, was not willing for us to pass through this land, for the Lord your God hardened his spirit and made his heart obstinate, in order to deliver him into your hand as he is today. And the Lord said to me, see, I have begun to deliver Sihon and his land over to you. Begin to occupy, that you may possess his land. Right? And so God is just repeating this message. I am giving this land to you. You go ahead, start to possess it, I'm going to go before you and remove these people before you, that you may go and possess it. And then Sihon, verse 32, with all his people came out to meet us at battle in Jahaz, and the Lord our God delivered him over to us, and we defeated him with his sons and all his people. So we captured all the cities at that time and utterly destroyed the men, women, and children of every city. We have no survivor. We took only the animals as our booty and the spoil of the cities which we had captured, right? And so God is slowly starting to show them, hey, you are going to take this land. So here's the first group of people. You saw that I did the exact same thing for the sons of Esau. You saw that I did the exact same thing for the sons of Moab and Ammon. I'm going to do this for you. Sihon is first. Go in, take that land. And so he's working with that generation. And God, he could have, and he would have done all of that without Deuteronomy, which is really interesting to think about, right? 38 years prior, because God had promised it to Abram, Isaac, and Israel. He was going to give it to them. So the law, there wasn't some kind of precondition. They didn't need that law, for them to go into the promised land, from God's perspective. But God gave it to them to help them, right? To prepare them for baptism, to prepare them to live a life faithful to Him, surrounded by people who are not faithful to Him. In the end, with the purpose that it might go well with them, right? And that is the purpose of Deuteronomy, right? Because that previous generation, they utterly failed, but a loving Father cared for them, disciplined them out of love. And because that generation had failed, he had therefore given them Deuteronomy before they entered into the promised land. So the way we need to look at Deuteronomy, the way we need to understand Deuteronomy, everything that's given in Deuteronomy, we need to understand that from the perspective that that entire book is the work of a loving father to prepare his children to be baptized, to live a life faithful to God, surrounded by people who aren't faithful, that it might be well, and that they might be a witness to those people around them, right? And this is the reflection at the end of Moses' life. This is his reflection on their and basically his whole life. We just turn to sorry, Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verses 1 to 6. This is the song of Moses that he essentially gives at the very end of his life. And all of Deuteronomy, I think, was given in one day. We went through this in our first class, but everything is the same day, the very same day, and he just continues this one long speech that this final message that Moses has for the children of Israel. And so towards the very, very end here of that speech, he says the following words in Deuteronomy 32 and verse 1. Give ear, O heavens, and let me speak. Let the earth hear the words of my mouth. Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, as the droplets of the fresh grass, and as the showers on herb. For I proclaim the name of the Lord. Ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are just. A God of faithfulness, without injustice, righteous and upright is he. They have acted corruptly toward him. They're not his children, right? And that's, again, those words are used very purposefully. They're not his children because of their defect, because they are perverse and crooked generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Is he not your father who has brought you? He has made you and established you, right? This is the man who raised you up. He gave you everything that you needed. You never lacked anything. And that's how you treat him. That's how you repay that man, by just completely not trusting him. He is your father, right? And that's the reflection at the end of Moses' life, that they knew to understand that he was that loving father. Now, there's one more verse we'll look up in Deuteronomy 3, because this ties into an experience that I had as literally as I was finishing this class. This is Deuteronomy chapter 3 and verse 23. And he says there, I also pleaded with the Lord. This is Moses pleading with God, right? I was pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you've begun to show your servants your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do such works and mighty acts as yours? Let me, I pray, cross over and see the fair land that is beyond the Jordan, that good hill country in Lebanon, right? Because Moses wasn't going to. God had already told Moses, you are not going to enter into the promised land. And Moses is pleading, literally said that he's pleading with him, God, please, I want to go in. I want to go in. Please let me see the land. I just want to go in. Verse 26, but the Lord is angry with me on your account, will not listen to me. And the Lord said, enough, speak to me no more of this matter. And I had the exact same situation a while ago. So uh, this is one of my sons, I won't mention his name. This was after school. He done all of his chores and he was all ready and done his instruments. He made us lunch for the next day. He was totally ready. And he came in the kitchen. He's like, Papa, is it okay if I go play with the neighbors? And I don't forget exactly what was going on, but dinner was almost ready and we're gonna go somewhere after, and Emily's doing something else, so I had to make dinner, and I didn't want to have to go out and then find Joa, and then it was gonna sorry, the unnamed son. Um, then I'd have to go look for him, and then it was gonna take time for him to come in, and I'm like, no, bud, uh, no, not now. And then he came back. He's like, Papa, like why can I go out? Like I'm done all my stuff. I'm like, bud, like I'm making dinner. But we'll have to leave soon. I don't have to come looking for you. No. And then, like whatever, 2 minutes later, it comes. It's like, why can I go play with the neighbor? And I said, Joa, that is enough. That's enough. Don't ask me again. I've said no. No is no. Don't ask me again. And this is just the most fatherly thing to me, where God just says, Moses, he literally says that, Moses, that's enough. Don't talk to me about this again. I've said no. Right? He is so much more of a father than I think we understand. I think that sometimes we make him into this, distant God, and that's certainly how I think the Jews looked at him. And you can look at the book of Deuteronomy like just a set of rules, and this is my command. You will do it, and if you're not going to do that, I'll punish you. Who does that? What parent does that? What parent says, "This is my rule. You will do it, and if you're not going to do my rule, I'm going to punish you." That's not how it works. You don't just punish your kids for not following a law or a rule. You will discipline them, but it's for their best interest, right? Because this rule, this law, whatever it is, it's there to help you, right? You tell your kids don't go on the road. It's not that crossing the road is bad or whatever. And maybe some things are bad, but your kids need to know that they don't understand the implications of running into the road. They don't understand that. And they need to learn to when they get to a point where they realize, okay, you know what? My safety is important. I need to look after myself, and I need to do things that are going to keep me safe. That is what you want your children to leave your home with the understanding of making decisions that are going to keep them safe. Right. And I say that within reason. I'm not saying you can do anything that's going to harm you. We don't have to put our kids in bubble wrap. But you want your kids to be mature enough and have that understanding to make good decisions. And that's what God wants for us. He wants us to learn and understand for us to make good decisions. And so I'll give you one example. This is in Mark chapter 2. One example of a law that God had given. And so he goes over the Sabbath. And you may recall from the Old Testament that when the law of the Sabbath was made, that this man went out on the Sabbath and he gathered sticks, and the whole congregation stoned him, stones until he died for picking up sticks. You think, wow, that is harsh. Are you just picking up sticks? There's not even a hazard in that. But he got punished by death. Now, look what it says here in Mark 2 and verse 23. And it happened that he was passing through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples began to make their way along while picking the heads of grain. The Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Right? That was their mind frame. This is not lawful. It's Sabbath. And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need, and he and his companions became hungry? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except for the priest. And he also gave it to those who were with him. And Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for a man, and not man for the Sabbath." Right? And so the Sabbath wasn't made, God didn't make a Sabbath because he wanted his own special day where everyone thought about him. It wasn't about God. It was about them. He made it for them. Now, of course, you know, God wanted them to take that time to reconnect with him, to talk to him. I'm not saying that in a way to take any kind of glory and honor and respect away from God, but these are the words of Jesus. Sabbath was made for us because it's best for us. It's best for us that we have that Sabbath, right? Because otherwise we don't learn, to not just go, 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 go all the time. We're busy, we're doing this, we're going here, we're going there. You need rest, you need a break. Your family needs a break, your brain needs a break. And if we don't understand that we need rest, we're just going to be riddled with anxiety and stress and pressure. And God knows it is best for us to take time to rest. It's important that we do that, right? And that's something that he wants us to learn. And so yeah, as a when Israel, in a metaphorical sense, when Israel was a young child, he needed to discipline them. He needs to discipline them because they were too young to understand the implications of not keeping the Sabbath. And so it is with our children, right? We don't fully understand the implications of not obeying our parents. And so a loving father gave us the Sabbath day that it might go well with us. I'll give you another example. If you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 23, Deuteronomy 23, and in verse 3. So it's funny because we just read about the Ammonites and the Moabites, and he says there in verse 3, no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter into the assembly of the Lord, none of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord, because they did not meet you with food and water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse you. Now, what's the next Moabite that we read about? She was a Moabitess, Ruth, right? She was called a Moabitess over and over and over. If you scroll down the same chapter in verse 17, none of the daughters of Israel shall be called prostitute, nor shall any of the sons of Israel be called prostitute. You shall not bring the hire of a harlot or the wages of a dog into the house of the Lord your God for any votive offering. Both of these are an abomination to the Lord. Who is the only person to be saved in all of Jericho? Is Rahab the harlot. And so you have to ask the question, why would God make that rule by the Ammonites and the Moabites, knowing that he was going to let a Moabitess into the land? Why? I didn't, so it wasn't, it's there for us to learn from. It's there for us to think about, what do these things mean? It's not just, hey, this is the rule, you're going to obey it, and if you're not going to obey it, I'm going to punish you. That's not why God gave it to us. He wants us to look at these things and understand Why? What is God teaching me? What can I learn? What is our Father? What is He doing in my life that I need to know here that it might go well with me? Right? And so it's important that we give our children boundaries. They need boundaries. We need to give them rules, to teach them principles, to ultimately change their hearts, right? Because their hearts are inherently evil. And we need to change their hearts. And they need those boundaries. They need those rules. They need it. Um, because then it will go well with them. So we'll just finish up in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verses 1 to 8. So Deuteronomy chapter 6, and we'll start in verse 1. Now, this is the commandments, the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, that you might do them in the land where you're going over to possess it, so that you and your sons and your grandson might fear the Lord your God, keep all his statutes and his commandments which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be prolonged. O Israel, you should listen and be careful to do it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign in your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your housetops and on your gates. Right. And so, you know, I think parenting, you figure it out as you go along. That seems to be my observation so far. You do your best. I chose to discipline my kids, but in the end, the one thing I learned, when I say discipline, I just mean spank. Um, and what I had learned is that when I did that, I set them. I mean, I have three boys, so it's they can easily run amok if you don't keep them under control. Um, but I'd have a conversation with them, and I explained to them that I was doing this because I love them, not because I'm angry, but because I love them, because I need to learn. I need you to learn these things, because if you don't learn to control your anger, if you don't learn to control your lust, if you don't learn to not be a bully, then guess what? You're going to be an adult who can't control their anger, and you're going to maybe even be violent. Like, my kids punch each other a lot. What you need to learn is that that's not an acceptable way to behave, right? It's not acceptable to scream at people. It is not acceptable to call other people names. It's not acceptable to bully. And when our children don't learn that, they just become adults who do that. And I think all of us probably know adults who never learned that, right? And I explained to them, uh, that there's lessons for you to learn. There's things that you need to know. And so as your children grow, you need to have those conversations with children so that they understand, why did you give them these commandments? Why did you give them these rules? Why did you make them do these things? It's the point isn't for them to just obey blindly. Then you've taught them nothing. That doesn't change their hearts. You need to change their hearts. And we all do, as parents, aunts and uncles, right? We need to change their hearts. Now, have you ever heard the expression that maybe, you've heard the parents say that to their child? Listen, son, you're gonna do what I say, and you're gonna like it. Now, I think we all know that doesn't work, right? They maybe will do what you say, but they're not necessarily gonna like it. But that is exactly what God says to his children. And that is what we're going to look into on Wednesday in our next class in the series on Deuteronomy. So that's the end of my class, Stephen. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was very, very vital lessons. And it really does. It makes us think twice that God really is, he's looking out for us as a father, right? and a father who loves to discipline, but for our own good. Um, we're told that discipline will bring righteousness, and that's the whole purpose. God is wanting us to become perfect. He wants us to be like him, and the things that we go through, sometimes they don't feel pleasant. Discipline isn't a pleasant feeling, but as Hebrews states, that discipline leads to sanctification. Discipline leads to peace and righteousness. So there is purpose behind it if we have the mindset to push through it and to see the way that God is looking for us. And it's kind of an amazing theme that we've had all day today, even through the exhortation that God is present in our lives the more we look for him. So yeah, we're very vital lessons for us to grab and hold on to as we truly wait the return of our Lord. So thank you for your efforts tonight. Brothers and sisters, we will go ahead and we'll close in prayer with our brother Kurt.
Okay, let us pray. Our good Father in heaven, we do reach out to you as our Father, as we realize you are the one who cares for us, who wants us to come to you, to depend on you, that we might see your goodness and your ways as better than our ways, that you might lead us in a way that is everlasting. As you led your children of Israel and reached out to them and wanted them to come into that promised land. You've promised us a kingdom, and we pray for that day. The day that we have a sure hope that we'll be here soon, and that you will bring us there and give us a place. For it is your good pleasure to give us that kingdom. We do thank you, and we praise you for your goodness. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, thank you, brothers and sisters, for joining. That's all. That's all we have for tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for your
Thanks,
efforts,
everyone.
Yoakum.
Stay safe out there.
Yeah.
Yes, stay safe, stay warm.
Yeah.
Have a great week, everyone.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Yep. Thank you
Thanks
and good
again,
night.
buddy.
You too, Steve.
Thank you.